From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Folklore. I'm your host, James Hernishin. It's something we all learn when we're kids. You don't change the rules after you start the game. It's why we play games in the first place, to teach us valuable life lessons, like not changing the terms of a contract after it's signed, or not backing out of a commitment to your team after you take the field, or not running for public office if you aren't willing to accept the outcome of the election. But that's exactly what Jefferson Griffin, a 44-year-old Republican member of the North Carolina Court of Appeals, is doing by challenging the validity of some 60,000 ballots cast in last year's election for a seat on the state Supreme Court. Jefferson isn't arguing voter fraud. Not this time. Instead, he says whether they were cast for him or for the judge now holding the seat, Democrat Allison Riggs, he wants those ballots tossed out on the most insignificant of technical grounds. For example, election officials might accidentally give the voter an outdated registration form that doesn't ask for all the information now required by law, like a driver's license number. Or, as you'll hear in this episode, a clerk might get a digit wrong when they transfer birth dates from a paper form to an electronic database. Never mind that there's an entire army of bureaucrats tasked with compensating for exactly this type of thing, which the law specifically says is not disqualifying. And then there are the election clerks, judges, and observers at the polling stations. And don't forget voter ID. All to ensure that minor typographical errors and administrative oversight don't deny anyone their constitutional right to vote. Plus, federal law prohibits the mass disenfranchisement of voters. In other words, once someone is allowed to vote, their vote counts. It's that simple. And yet, Judge Griffin wants to retroactively disenfranchise 60,000 North Carolinians of their right to have their vote counted. Why? Because he only lost the election to Justice Riggs by 734 out of 5.5 million votes cast in November. Not one, but two recounts confirmed her win. But maybe, just maybe, without those 60,000 ballots, the outcome would be different. According to an analysis by everyone's favorite academic observer, Chris Cooper of Western Carolina University, quote, challenged voters are younger, more likely to be from out of state, more likely to identify as a member of a minority group, and much more likely to have unidentified race, gender, and ethnicity. They're also a little less likely to be registered Republicans. As you can imagine, people are not happy. On January 14th, a group of protesters gathered in Raleigh beginning at 6 in the morning to try to read out the names of each of those voters, just for the record. Here's one of the readers.
Lori Morrison Van Ness, Andrew D. Mosley, Jeffrey Moser, Michael Mosley, Samuel Mosley, John D. Motzard, Lori A. Motzard.
It went on like that for about 17 hours before they called it quits in the brutal cold that was last week. Yes, it was a stunt, but a stunt with a serious purpose. Each of those names is that of a real, living, breathing American voter. One of those 60,000 is Saluta's David Twiggs. He's probably one of the last people you want to pick a fight with when it comes to the finer points of voter registration. After all, he spent 20 years working for the Knox County Elections Commission in Tennessee. So he knows a fair bit about how these things work. David was among 141 Polk County voters, Democrats, Republicans, and unaffiliated, whom Griffin doesn't believe should have had a say in whether he joins the state Supreme Court. David and I talked at his home in Saluda. David Twiggs, welcome to Folklore.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's start by introducing yourself. How did you end up here in Polk County? Because I know you have a long history.
Yes. I have been coming to Polk County since I was 5 years old. My grandparents bought this home in 1925. In fact, when we actually did research, I had a friend do some research. It was in my grandmother's name, not my grandfather's name, which was kind of unusual. I don't know that. I was told that sometimes that was because of the Depression. But my family worked for the British Railroad in Cuba, though the family is from here. In fact, one of my direct descendants John Twiggs was in the Battle of Kings Mountain, and his name's on the plaque if you go to the Kings Mountain thing. And so our family's been around in this area for quite some time, but my father needed to get out of the tropics for health reasons. And because he was with the railroad down in Cuba, my grandfather, he chose Saluda. So they would get on a ferry in Havana Harbor, get to Key West, take a train to Jacksonville, spend the night in Jacksonville, and then get off right here at the station. And Charlie and Jack Ward would haul their summer clothes and everything they were going to have for the whole summer up the mountain. And so we decided to come here. My kids have been coming here. They liked it so much. My daughter teaches at Mars Hills College, and my son teaches at Polk High School. So they settled here, and so we decided to fix the house up. We made many changes. It didn't have his central heat and air and all that stuff. We added all that to it. And now here and loving it.
Classic Saluda story. Right. And also tell me a little bit about your time in Tennessee, because I think you have some relevant experience with respect to elections that we need to hear about.
That's correct. I've been involved in Democratic politics all my life. And I grew up in the Tri-Cities areas, worked on campaigns there as a kid and all the way through. In fact, I helped a Republican running for city council who was my vice principal. So I've done both sides. But I was a county commissioner in Loudoun County, Tennessee for 8 years and ran several campaigns, helped elect first female to city council in Lenoir City. That wasn't like a widow of somebody, that kind of thing. Then I came here. Then I started work for the Knox County Election Commission. I had a friend who became the administrator of elections, and he hired me to work. And I've been there for 20 years and retired from there after working 20 years in election inside the office for 20 years to our house here in Saluda, North Carolina.
So in other words, you understand how elections work.
Pretty well. I mean, I've been through several of them. Been on both sides of the issue and trying to get voters for my particular candidate, and being on the administrative end, trying to make sure elections are run fairly and accurately.
All right, so then let's talk about what happened, I guess, just in the last few weeks. Mm-hmm. As I alluded to in my intro, there was a very close election for one of the seats on the North Carolina Supreme Court. And the loser, because he has lost through 2 recounts, has challenged 60,000 ballots, wanting to throw them out. Now, they're not all Democrat, they're not all Republican, they're a mix. But because they tended to be, I think, more likely to be mail-in ballots, there might be a bias in favor of Democrat votes, right? So that's what...
Hey, James, one thing that really I need to correct about what you're saying. The party is called the Democratic Party.
Sorry, you're right.
And it's important because this was a concentrated thing. It wasn't something that just came about. When Newt Gingrich was successful in taking over the Congress for the first time in 50 years, he and Frank Glutz and Grover Norquist got together and coached that new freshman Republican team. And they went on Fox News and coached those folks to call our party the Democrat Party. And now they've been so successful in that with their talk radio and all the other conservative media out there that even Democrats don't use the right nomenclature for our own party. That's like saying South Carolina should call Clemson the Clemson Penguins instead of the Clemson Tigers. And that's not fair and that's not right. No,
that's a fair point. And I apologize. It's just a slip of being too familiar with the subject, really. Anyway, so these 60,000 ballots, which the Republican candidate, Griffin, is challenging, a group of people put those names out there, and you can go online and search for them, and I'll put a link to that opportunity to search for your own name in our episode notes. How did you find out that your name was on that list?
Well, I worked this election cycle very strongly with the Democratic Party and got to know our leadership. And Mr. Hirsch, John Hirsch, one of our people was the first one to know. I've been notified. In fact, my daughter just called me this morning to tell me that, but I've had numerous people tell me, and I've looked it up myself. But he got the list. He was the first one to tell me, David, your name is on this list. Now, I worked very, very hard in this election cycle, and I was deeply disappointed by the results, and had become so despondent and afraid for our democracy that I thought maybe our experiment had ended. I had already gone down to the election commission and taken myself off the voter rolls. When they did this, it gave me made me so angry. I actually went back down and sought to become involved again and re-registered to vote. And that is when the clerk there actually saw the error between my birthday year. They had actually mistyped 1957 as 1952, and that didn't match up with my Social Security, which you can see. I got a copy of the original voter registration form for you to have, that you can see I had my Social Security. That's not the reason. But one thing that's known is I read an article from the Fayetteville Observer this morning that said one of the reasons that many people were targeted for this was because they either didn't have a type of race down here selected, which you can see if you look at that. I just decided not to block that. I don't think that's anybody's business. So I didn't do that. And so maybe that's the reason mine was chosen. I don't have any idea, but I do know that that was one of the reasons. At least the Fayetteville Observer said that many of these people were on the list. And then when they caught the error of them saying I was born in 1952 instead of 1957, then that was sufficient enough for them to challenge my vote.
There must have been an awful lot of effort put into going through the registration forms. I mean, this is not something...
in the computer age, I think things can be done quite quickly, as far as seeing, is there some missed thing between one's social and one's birth and other kinds of things. Now, for them to look at this part, that would have been another, but if it's blank, or if you had Black or Hispanic or other type of possible, I actually marked Democratic, so they knew what side I was going to be probably voting on.
So this is like a dictionary definition of a technical problem. It's not about whether or not you're a registered voter, whether or not you're a citizen of this country. No one is actually challenging your right to vote.
That's right.
What they are challenging is your voter registration form.
The fact that there was a miss thing between my birthday and what, I'm sure that there was a thing that came up when the computer searched, hey, this person actually doesn't exist because the birth date and the social doesn't match up.
Now, it would seem to me that if you were allowed to vote, and then now we have voter ID requirements, so you had to show your identification when you showed up.
Twice, because I voted in March.
Right. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, if someone had a problem with you, with your eligibility as a voter, the time to challenge it would have been before the election.
Or right then. They can make a decision right then. They
Right.
have judges. There's a method that you get the judges together and they decide whether someone's legitimate or not. If you have that's the reason we have poll watchers, and there's places inside. That's the thing that people sometimes are so concerned about, the legitimacy of our voter system that we have in this country. One of the great things is it's so decentralized, it's almost impossible for massive voter fraud on the scale that has been in recent years put upon the American people. It would be almost impossible to pull off, because I know what those systems are. In Tennessee, we actually have, and I know in North Carolina, you have people from both sides watching right there every step. And that's a good thing, because that way each side is watching each other. So it's almost impossible to commit any type of massive voter fraud in any election.
Right. And of course, all these allegations of voter fraud, the ones that have been followed through and investigated, it never turns out to be true.
That's right. Except for the one case in North Carolina where the guy was actually harvesting absentee ballots, and those that were Democratic, he was getting rid of and not turning in. That
Right, yeah.
And now there's been a law that's passed that protects from that, so that you only have family members that can get your absentee ballot.
So it's fair to say you haven't come across this kind of thing in your experience before.
I have obviously had people claim, because I've been, like I said, I've actually been involved in politics since I was 6 years old. And I know that seems crazy, but I really have. My mother was deeply moved when John F. Kennedy was shot. She volunteered for Johnson then. And so I helped her, even that on a bicycle stuffing mailboxes. Then it wasn't that considered a big deal. You could just do it without postage, but now it's against the law. But
right, anyway. So you've been involved in this game since before you could actually vote.
That's right. That's okay. Right. And worked in many elections.
Right. So this just really surprises me. And I've been following the efforts to rig the game for quite a while. Because to be blunt, that's what the Republican Party has been trying to do. Gerrymandering, which is something the Democrats used to be pretty good at, Republicans have taken to a whole new level now. And voter ID is another part of the puzzle in terms of trying to limit who can cast their ballot.
That's the thing. On the guise of trying to make something that never was broken, trying to make it more legitimate, when actually the real sole purpose was to eliminate. In Tennessee, they actually wouldn't even, which I'm glad when I came to North Carolina, you all at least allow student college IDs to count as a valid ID. In Tennessee, they said, oh, that's too easy because people go out drinking. They mass produce the college IDs to get people to be able to drink when they weren't supposed to. And so that's their justification for not allowing college IDs in Tennessee. This is crazy. None of that really was an issue. And it's part of that whole issue we talked about earlier, changing the word democratic to Democrat. I, in first, never could understand why they were trying to do it. Now, I understand. They really are trying to attack democracy itself. They want just a few people. The president just talked about that in his farewell address. This issue that the fewer and fewer people controlling things that affect all of our lives. And our country and our citizens had better wake up. Democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to be engaged. You have to study, and you have to watch it on a daily basis, really, if you really want to know what's going on.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, because I thought it would be great if we could have an example of what people have to do. And if you go on to, it's the website that allows you to search for your name on this list, and you find you are on there, in other words, your ballot is being challenged, you should go to the Board of Elections in Columbus, right? When you did, what was your experience there?
They explained it to me in very rational. In fact, Deborah down there was very helpful, very apologetic, said she could clearly see it was just a typo, that whoever was the data entry, she didn't tell me who that was, but that somebody, when they entered my voter registration form, they actually said 1952 instead of 1957, and she could clearly see that it was a 7. And then I filled out my new voter registration. So everything's correct now. But there may be somebody else out there that needs to correct their voter registration form that was typed in just incorrectly. And we need to fix those, all those.
And again, this doesn't go to your eligibility, because if you're born in 52 or 57, you're still eligible to vote.
That's right.
I mean, if you were born in 2012, that would be a problem.
Right. And what was interesting is Deborah actually told me that she's looking at each one of these, trying to correct these errors, which is a good, in one sense, Judge Griffin has done a service, because then the election commissions can correct these typographical errors and don't really need to do anything except do that and issue then a new voter registration card. But she said most of them that she's looked at, for as Polk County goes, were typographical errors.
Is there an argument to be made that typographical errors that mean the records are not 100% accurate should affect the validity of a vote?
No. But I can tell you, because like I said, I worked in it for 20 years. I'm sure that I personally made, because I did this. I put people's names into the voter rolls in Tennessee. And I'm sure that there were times that I could have typed in something erroneously and it needed to be corrected. And so it's going to happen. I mean, we're humans. There's humans processing paperwork, and those kinds of things are going to happen. But on the scale that anyone learns, and I want your listeners to hear what I'm saying, it is almost impossible that that has affected any race. I was involved in a state representative race when I was in high school where the margin was 2 votes. 2 votes. And the guy, we were working for a guy named Mo Brotherton who was trying, it was a Democratic primary. He was charging an incumbent Democrat. The Democrat we had actually worked for, but he said he wasn't going to run. So this guy got in, and then he came back and jumped back in the race. And we're people of our name. You know, once we commit to somebody, we stayed with our horse that we went for. And so he lost by 2 votes. If he'd stayed at Lynn Garden campaigning that precinct, he would have probably gotten those 2 votes. But he came out to Colonial Heights where we were working hard and out at the polls, you know, pushing his name over and over. He really didn't need to come out. He might have gotten the 2 votes that he needed to win the primary.
All right.
Oh, and one other thing I want to remember, because I even gave money, because like I said, I own this property. But when Sheriff Beasley ran for Supreme Court, she lost her race by a margin less than this one.
It was like 400,
right.
I think. Yeah.
And she did the Democratic thing and accepted the will of the people and conceded. That is what Judge Griffin should do. That's what an honorable human being should do. You run the best race you can, and once the votes are counted, that's it. There was nothing wrong with asking for a recount. My friend Mo Brotherton, he asked for a recount, especially with only 2 votes, but it came out the same both times. And so that's what should happen in this case.
I'm really trying to get my head around what Judge Griffin is hoping to accomplish here, because, I mean, other than he wants to be on the Supreme Court, obviously, but it seems extremely unlikely that this will succeed.
Well, the only thing that could is if he gives enough vote to the members of the Supreme Court, which are 5-2, majority Republican, then they're not going to be able to go back because we have a secret ballot in this country. Nobody knows how you vote except what primary you vote in. That's public record. Or if you, in North Carolina, Tennessee, we don't do but register by party, but North Carolina, you register by party. They know what party you registered in, okay? Right. But they can't just throw out the 60,000 votes in one race. So he's hoping for, and this is my opinion, that they create enough doubt that they call for a special election to rerun this election. That's thwarting democracy. That's not what should happen. The person who lost the race after 2 recounts should concede and accept the will of the people.
Well, isn't there a longer-term issue at stake here? Now, so the current Supreme Court is 5-2, say, Republican, Democratic. But if Judge Griffin wins and replaces Allison Riggs, then it will be 6-1.
That's correct.
And that means that the 3 Republicans whose seats are up the next time around.
I think it's 2 years. I think it's actually 2028 that there's 3-year chance.
Right.
We've got to still win one more, keep one more Democratic seat in 2026.
Right. But if Judge Griffin does replace Judge Riggs on the Supreme Court, then no matter who runs in the next time round, the Republicans will retain their majority control.
And the key is, in 2026, they have the chance to do it still again. They could beat the current judge, other Democratic judge that's running. Okay, they'll be running for re-election. So this isn't their last bite at the apple. They could go ahead, accept the results of this election, and then fight hard in 2026. I guarantee you we'll be fighting hard to keep our justice on the Supreme Court, but they could fight and beat then. And then the 3, we couldn't win the majority back again then. But we're going to fight as hard as we can because that's what the system is that we have a give and take between parties. Compromise has been so denigrated now in our society, and that's really what we need to get back to. You talked about how the Democrats did gerrymander, and I agree. Dixiecrats did gerrymander heavily in the South for many years. That's why there weren't Republicans elected for many, many years. But that was based on a good old boy system of where those votes are located. In 2008, when President Obama was elected, okay, the next year it's every 10 years that the census is taken when this is going to happen, and then the district lines have to be redrawn. In 2010, he was asked to put his system that got him elected into those races. He said he wouldn't do it. We lost many of our state legislature races that year. And at that time, computers had become to that certain point, and now they're even better in being able to so well target where these lines are. I've been involved in the process as a county commissioner. I sat on and had to redraw county commission districts. I saw the maps that you use. The scale is so fine and so much more accurate that you can actually pick. It shouldn't be politicians picking the voters. It should be voters picking the politicians. And that's the system that we're trying to break down. And it's been so much more computerized. And that's what's caused this imbalance. And frankly, I don't know how we get that changed.
Well, is that what this whole thing is really all about the ability of parties to gerrymander their own states? Because under the districts that the last election, the last congressional election was run on, we ended up with 7 and 7. Democratic and Republican congressmen in our state. And now I think because we have 11-3.
Right.
So,
and then you look at the number of votes, though, that each one gets, and the Democrats outnumber the number of Republican votes.
Right.
It's just crazy. We don't have representation. Talk about taxation without representation. That's what you've got.
And the only reason the Republicans were able to take those 11 seats instead of just 7 was because the North Carolina Supreme Court reversed itself and decided
after the Republican Party got the majority.
Right. So First step, you put a Republican majority on the Supreme Court. Second step, you revisit a ruling that the previous court, which had been Democratic majority, you reverse that rule, reinstate the gerrymandered districts.
You still have to have taken over the state legislature, which the Republicans were effective in doing. But those districts also every 10 years, all these districts get rejoined all the way down to county commission. Now, Polk County is different from where I came in Tennessee. In Tennessee, you actually run in your county commission district, and you represent the people in that district. You don't run countywide. You can't gerrymander your county commission districts because in Polk County, you run countywide. Yeah. Even though you're representing an area, your name is on the ballot in all the different districts.
Right. The final step of this, though, is that the extra 4 Republican congresspeople in North Carolina, in Washington, that's the difference between Republicans and Democrat
control
of the House of Congress.
That's right. Right here in North Carolina.
Representatives.
Right here in North Carolina.
So there's a direct line between what Judge Griffin is trying to do, secure a Republican majority on the North Carolina Supreme Court and preserving the gerrymandered districts, which translates into control of Congress.
That's right. That's right. And another issue is the state legislature's attempt to take away the duty of the governor to assign who is in control of all the county election commissions across the state of North Carolina. If they're successful in doing that, then Republicans would be in control of every county election commission. And this is a bad thing about if you have that you pick what party you're going to vote in. Oh, that's a Democratic registration. Wonder if Judge Griffin is successful, who's to say there aren't going to be clerks appointed by Republicans to, quote, make mistakes in clerical errors that will get votes kicked out? It opens up your whole election system to massive fraud. And that's why it's so important. It's not just some small little thing that we can go about our daily lives and forget about, because it's going to make a big determination. We need to keep the laws. We elected governors and we elect people to offices based on the jobs they had and the duties they had that were enumerated on election day. Not that you change after election day because you didn't win, you change their actual job titles. We
Right.
don't do that.
And there was two different legislative bills on this issue. One, the previous North Carolina legislature wanted to transfer the control of the boards of elections away from the governor to the legislature, right? That's now in the courts, though. It was challenged. Governor Cooper challenged that, and I think it's still in the courts, right? We haven't.
I think Governor Cooper won that battle. That's why the second bill came up, and now they're moving it to the state auditor. I think one of the determination was because the legislature wasn't part of the executive branch, but they can't claim that now, the state auditor now. So the Republicans think they have cleared up that issue so that it will pass muster. I'm hoping that a court will not say, people had election based on the duties that were of the office at the day of election. You can't go back and take away the people's vote just because you didn't like the outcome. Because I guarantee you, if Mark Robinson won governorship, they wouldn't have been trying to take his ability to appoint the administrators and the majority on the election commissions of the county away from him. They wouldn't have done that.
No, I think it almost goes without saying.
Well, I think it's important to say.
You're right. It is important to say. So what can we do about this?
We need to watch. Right now, the main thing an average person, first go and look at the list, and I understand you're going to put up the link so that people can actually check to see if their names or names of friends or loved ones that they have are on the list, and get those issues corrected, okay? And then watch to see how the courts rule. And if they rule for Judge Griffin in this case, okay, because he is still a sitting judge, but not on the Supreme Court, then we have the people have to make some decisions, some hard decisions about what we. You ever heard of the deceased Congressman Lewis said, sometimes you have to get in good trouble.
Yes.
And I think that would be a case that the people need to come out into the streets and make some good trouble, because it's not right. It's against democracy. And I think there's going to be other times. I mean, this is just a small thing. We're going to be seeing many issues like this. I fear coming down the pike, and people need to be watching very closely, because we are a divided nation, and it's very close. It's not like there was this massive, as Republicans try to claim. They did get all three branches of government, but the margins are very narrow all over the country, not in North Carolina in particular. And so we need to stay vigilant and watch what goes on. And if good trouble is what's demanded, then we need to be prepared to take that kind of action.
It's kind of scary when we get into this realm, because what we're talking about, I think what you're implying is that if we don't have confidence that the Supreme Court wasn't elected legitimately, in other words, if they cheated to get who they wanted on the Supreme Court in this state, then there's this loss of the concept of legitimacy.
We have that with the national Supreme Court now. I mean, a person died as a court. You then get to a point, and Mitch McConnell held up the nomination just because election. Yet, when the same exact facts happened, except the person didn't die, they resigned before an election, much closer, Mitch McConnell went ahead and approved that person to go ahead and be seated. So, this kind of playing games with things that have been heretofore routine, whether it's counting electoral votes or advice and consent from the Senate, these things are critical. And we've got to watch, and you need to watch, which party is doing that mostly, and why are they doing it? And ask yourself those hard questions. I'm not going to give you the answers. I know in my mind what the answers are, but you need to do this research yourself and begin to watch this closer. we shouldn't be just voting what my mama or papa always did. We need to look closely at who we're supporting and what they support. The guy I told you I worked for a Republican, he was a California Republican, moved to Tennessee, became vice principal at my high school. But that was back when we had liberal Republicans. That he was like a Pete McCroskey type Republican. Some people don't even remember he was a senator from California, but was against the Vietnam War. And so I went door to door for that. I mean, I knew the vice principal very well. I went to school there for 4 years, and we had a good relationship, and I did a lot of work. And he was a Republican. But that doesn't mean I worked in my local Loudoun County. We had different sections of Democrats. There were Waller Democrats for a guy there, and Eblen Democrats. Well, I was a Waller Democrat. And so sometimes in mayor's races and city council races, they weren't running by party. I voted and worked for Republican candidates. So you've got to watch and you've got to educate yourself about what's going on. And just because you're a Democratic or Republican person that you lean that way, you need to watch these things carefully and vote your conscience. But think hard. I know this area. I mean, there's not much difference between the people that live in Western North Carolina and East Tennessee. They're very independent people and have been for centuries. The people that settled here, they're hard-scrabble people. And even when the Democrats controlled the South, this area stayed Republican, not really out of altruistic things, but because they disagreed with the wealthy landowners, which were mostly slave owners. And that's why the Underground Railroad went through here, because these were people that were trying to not really do something, altruistic, but because they saw that these people were being used, and that is best for them to get some more power would be to help them. And so they've traditionally been Republican in this area. But we need to think about that. We need to think about who is really doing things that are in our best interest, or the average person's best interest, not a few wealthy people's best interest.
Well, it often does come back down to whose interests, the wealthy or the rest of us, right?
That's right.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up there, because any further discussion, I think, takes us into some really tricky realm of whether or not you want to be a good citizen and just obey the rules, or you want to be like John Lewis and cause a little bit of good trouble. And that could take us all day to talk about it. So.
That's true. But sometimes that's important. And that's part of our democratic process. The right of free speech, all those things are on the line. And it's on our line every election. And it's important to vote. I made my decision a long time ago. I'm a liberal. And I think that's one of the problems the Democrats have made a mistake. We've allowed liberal to be a bad word. We need to take back some of the language. Just like they changed democratic to Democrat. We need to quit letting them decide. They made something. Who thought of being woke as being a bad thing? I mean, we'd rather be awake than to sleep, wouldn't we? We want people to be woke. We don't want them to be asleep, but yet they take language and they change meanings. And we've got to take back our language, and people need to understand why the English language and using what they are. I'll manipulate here. Conservative has the word con in it. So that should tell you something.
Okay, so the take-home message for me then is I don't know what to do about a Supreme Court that people don't think is legitimate, but we can at least start paying attention to the language we use and the media we pay attention to, and think a little bit
for ourselves.
All right. Thanks so much for your time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I want to repeat one thing David and I discussed before wrapping up, because it's important. The current composition of the North Carolina Supreme Court is 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. If Griffin somehow manages to convince his fellow judges that he deserves a seat, it will be 6-1. In that event, even if all the Republicans up for election in 2028 are replaced by Democrats, the Republicans will still have a majority on the court, one that was only made possible by judges who refused to play by the rules. At the moment, the main question is whether Griffin's complaint should be handled at the state or federal level. And given how muddled these kind of cases can get, I wouldn't be placing any money on how the judges judge which judges get to decide who gets to be a judge. As always, you can reach me by sending an email to jamesh@folklore.com. Thanks for listening.
Stephen Brown, Sarah Ruth Brown, Thomas Brown, Lisa Olanette Brown Guy Giddings, Kenneth Joseph Bruce, Valerie Ruchon, Allison Brumble, Astor Julian Brunstein Frazier, Matthew Allen Brunton, Michael Holmes Bryan, Michaela Hannah Bryson, Robert Colin Buchanan.